All right, it's 2:05, so I think we will start getting this show on the road. And for everyone who's just entering, feel free to drop your name in the chat and why you're here joining us and some questions you might have. We're about to get underway. All right, everybody, welcome to our Community Democracy webinar series, day 2. And today we'll be talking about thinking like a lawyer before and after risk. But before we get started, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping tips to keep everything running smoothly. We will be recording and streaming today's webinar. So if you're uncomfortable with that, now would be the time to sign off, and you can always watch it later. Please stay on mute while you are viewing us today until the very end when we ask questions. The way to do that from your phone is *6. And also, it's probably best practice to turn your video off. I know that Zoom is having some issues with playback because of everyone going back to school. So to keep bandwidth low, keep your video off while you're viewing. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So there's actually 2 ways that you can go about asking the questions. The first one would be to type it in the chat and send it to me. My name is Josh Eisenfeld. And you can also at the end of the presentation raise your hand. And if you're on your phone, the way to do that is *9. The way to do that on your computer is to go down to the reactions tab and click raise your hand. You can even do wave or anything with a hand, and I will know that you want to ask a question. And then I think if there are links and things along the way, I will send them. So check the chat for that constantly. And also, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Josh Eisenfeld, our marketing director here at Fairshake. And I'll go on to the next slide. Fairshake is a nonprofit environmental law firm that provides access to justice for people and their environment. We provide legal services on an income basis throughout the Appalachian Basin, and we have offices in both Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we work within West Virginia and beyond. But the goal here is with this webinar series and with a lot of our work is to go beyond the courtroom and to provide support and tools for community leaders that go beyond the services of a normal attorney. And so, that's part of what we are here doing today, and providing you guys with some useful tools and sort of demystifying what it means to be an attorney. So I'm really excited about this presentation. Today's presenter is Tim Fitchett. He is our staff attorney in Pennsylvania. And Tim is from southeastern PA originally, but moved out to the Pacific Northwest in 2008, where he became deeply involved with his community and even decided to go to law school. Now Tim is back in his home state, and we're happy to have him here today to tell you all the secrets about being an attorney in his webinar, Thinking Like a Lawyer Before and After Risk. But before we get on with the main event, just a few little bits for you. If you have any questions about how to reach out to us or things you want to follow up with afterwards, we know not everything can be thought of right here and right then. So you can always get to us by going to our website and the Contact Us page. You can keep up to date with what's going on with the work that we do by signing up for our newsletter at this link below. And then also, of course, we can't do this kind of work without donations and support from folks like you. So if you would be so inclined to donate, this is our link to our donation page. And we really appreciate all of your support and showing up here today. So without any further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and kick it off to you, Tim, to take it home. You're on mute.
All right, thank you, Josh. Let me kick it on over so I can get my screen going. Hopefully that's visible for everybody.
Looking great.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for coming out to this webinar series. As Josh mentioned, the topic of the day is going to be thinking like a lawyer before and after risk. A lot of the times we have clients who, because they don't necessarily understand certain things that they could have done along the process, they can kind of shoot themselves in the foot or lose a lot of their ability to change the outcome of some things. So I kind of wanted to talk about how community advocates and activists can use the skills that we use every day in their own practices. So the goals for the talk today, the first is going to be just to understand why it's so important to act, and understanding what exactly you can lose and what might be forgotten if you don't take any action whatsoever. The second part is understanding when to act, so understanding what you can do kind of at different times. And then the last two bullet points here are kind of in the same vein of how do you effectively act? What is it that you can do? What is it that you can actually put forward to change an outcome? So a lot of folks tend to think that sort of the courtroom is the salvation, right? That everything can be solved if we go into the courtroom, and there a judge will fairly decide everything. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of things are kind of decided before a courtroom is even involved, and lawyers do a lot of work outside of the courtroom. And a lot of the work that we do on a daily basis, they're not things that I necessarily learned in law school. They're not things that I learned from a book. It was learning from experience and learning from reading articles about advocacy and activism, negotiations, those kinds of things. And I don't want that to be disheartening. It really should be empowering, because there's a lot of things that you don't need a law license to do. There's a lot of things that you can do to change the outcomes of events that are occurring in your community. And I want to kind of try and help give some of those skills to you today to show you where your power is and how to effectively wield that power. So don't tell anybody, but lawyers aren't special. We are just normal people who happened to take some extra time to train in how to dissect problems. And that's largely what law school is learning how to dissect problems. And we also understand the procedural mechanisms and the general structure of the government and how things operate, right? And so it's, again, one of the things I'm going to somewhat talk about today. The thing is, you can learn these things. Anybody can learn these things. And so part of Fair Shake's mission in increasing access to justice is to try and give some of these skills that everyday people can use in their communities and effectively change the outcomes without having to go and hire an attorney at perhaps a cost that they can't pay, or just something that they don't want to get into. So one thing to keep in mind throughout all of this is that corporations tend to take the path of least resistance. They purposefully seek out under-resourced communities. And it's a shame, because they essentially try and prey on those that they don't think are going to fight back, right? The people that they don't think are going to be paying attention because, maybe everybody's working, long jobs. They're just trying to make their bills paid, not necessarily go out and fight and then pick a fight with a big corporation. So the corporations will purposefully seek out these small communities to do this. But with the right tools, it is possible to change your community for the better. So the first question that I want to talk about is kind of why. Why do we actually need to act when a permit is coming up, when decisions are being made? And the simple fact of the matter is that if you don't act, you're going to be forced to live with the consequences of those that are acting, right? You're going to live in a world of the people that are actively out there giving their arguments, trying to do their things. Whatever they want is what you're going to have to live with, because they are the ones sharing their views, right? So government agencies just can't be counted on to enforce all of the laws that are on the books. For one, there's just too many people that are committing crimes, whether it is, speeding or environmental pollution, those are things the EPA just doesn't have enough people. The police don't have enough police, right? You can't stop all the crime. And so there's discretion, and you can't count on them to enforce every single law that's out there. They also might be not paying as much attention as you could, right? That somebody can apply for a permit to do something, and they say these are the laws that apply. And as much as I respect the people that are working at the DEP, they may take the applicant's word for it and not realize that other laws apply. Whereas if you came in and mentioned something, they could apply those. The other big thing that's going to keep coming up today is that decision makers, the judges, the county commissioners, zoning hearing boards, they can actually interpret the law in many, many ways. The law is not black and white. It's not something that can simply be, there's no easy answers, right? And the Supreme Court is just a really good example of this. There are 9 brilliant people on that court that look at the exact same statutes, the exact same regulations, and the exact same case law, and yet decide entirely differently and think that it should be the exact opposite of the way somebody else is. So the law is not black and white. And if you aren't there to offset the balance, you're gonna be, again, relegated to the consequences of those that are voicing their opinions. The other big reason that you need to act on a regular basis is that you can actually lose rights by not acting. And so I'm going to actually go through a couple of legal concepts around this sort of losing your rights to do things. So we're going to talk about sort of the background statutory scheme and legal system that's already in place, and then an exhaustion of remedies, the record, permit shields, statutes of limitation, and negotiations. The first one that is really, really important is just the general background system that we're all living in right now. It's out there at this moment. There are court cases that are going to determine how these lower bodies and judges need to decide things. There are statutes and regulations that are going to allow people to do one thing or not do something. And then there are already decision makers that are already on these boards that are already in place and working to make these decisions. So all of those things are going to affect the outcome of any decision that's put before the board. Anything is going to have to kind of be filtered through all of those pieces. And so you really need to act now and continuously to make sure that those decision makers, that those statutes and regulations, making sure that all of those align with your values. Because if they don't, then there's almost nothing that you can do at a certain point if those decision makers are just going to decide the other way, or that the regulations are going to allow something that you don't want to allow. So it's really important, this is the core of democracy. And when we're talking about community democracy, it's getting your community to have their hand in democracy in the local community, to have a hand in the decisions that are made, in the statutes and the regulations that are being promulgated. And one instance of this, that shows just how important this can be. I live in Swissvale, and in the last election, there were 4 seats on the board, 4 out of 4 seats on the local commissioners board that were up for election, and there were 5 applicants. So 5 applicants for 4 seats. I knew one person that believed what I believed, but even if I knew that the other 4 people all believed the exact opposite of everything that I hold dear, I didn't have a choice. 3 of those people, a majority of that board, is now, and I don't actually know what the beliefs are of those other 3 people, but I'm saying the majority of that board could have been still a majority against what I want, just because there weren't people being active and weren't being involved in their local communities. Another example of this was in Elizabeth Township, where the local board of commissioners actually wanted fracking in their community and made essentially an overlay, which my colleague Ryan will talk a little bit more about overlays tomorrow, but they essentially allowed any kind of fracking infrastructure in any type of zoning in the entire township. And they did this because the gas companies were asking them to do it. And then sure enough, after they passed all these laws, the gas companies moved in, and now there are people trying to fight against these fracking wells all across the county. Whereas had they perhaps acted earlier, had they been paying attention to who was on those boards, then it might have been possible that the red carpet wasn't just laid out for the fracking industry in that area. The next couple of legal concepts are a little quicker than that one. So the first one's exhaustion of remedies. If you don't follow the proper administrative procedures, you can actually lose the right to appeal to take the next step. And so if you took a decision and tried to take it to circuit court, by the time that was decided that no, you needed to take it to the environmental hearing board first, then you may have lost the opportunity. The time limit on appealing to the environmental hearing board would have already run. And so everything would just fall apart because you failed to act early enough and in the right way. The third one's the record. So the record's the compilation of everything that occurs in the lower proceedings. So transcripts of any of the hearings that are on a permit, any comments that were submitted. And in every appeal of a permitting decision, that's what you have to work with. You often can't bring things in from outside of the record. And arguments have to have been brought up down below. So you can really lose a lot in your later actions if you haven't taken those actions to build the record, to make those arguments down below. So it's really important that you think about what is being put in front of the board and what kind of arguments might we want to make later. The fourth one is permit sheets. So once a permit has been issued, the permittee is allowed to do whatever it says, regardless of its illegality. So if, say, a steel foundry wants to just dump all of their waste directly into the Monongahela River, and the DEP is not paying attention that day, and they say, okay, that's fine. And nobody comes up and does any comments, and the permit's issued, and nobody appeals it, then that permit is now issued, and regardless of how abhorrent that is to the Clean Water Act, they're going to be allowed to do that. And there's not going to be any legal recourse to stop them from doing it. So if you don't act soon enough, things may occur that simply cannot be undone. Kind of similar is the legal concepts of statute of limitations, latches, and statutes of repose. These are all different statutes or court-created doctrines that essentially say if you waited too long, we're not going to let you sue anymore. Statutes of limitation actually say, after 2 years, anything before that, in 2 years is not always the case. Depends what exactly the situation is. But once you're past that time period, you just can't sue for it. Latches says you took too long, you were living with it for long enough, we're just going to say that it couldn't have been that bothersome, you don't get to sue for it now. And then the sixth legal concept that I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail is negotiations. And the reason I bring this up as part of the why you need to act early is that a lot of things can only happen in a negotiation earlier in the process. So once you get a little bit further down the road, once a permit's been issued, there's much less impetus for a business, a corporation, whatever it may be, to actually negotiate with you, right? At some point it becomes well, let's just push it through. We'll go to the, even if you appeal or the environmental hearing board or whatnot, it's cheaper to just do that than to make these changes. Whereas if you are there early on in the process and kind of being a little bit pesky, right, and being a little annoying bug and saying, you know what, I want you to change this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do this, they may actually try and appease you and build those things into some sort of settlement agreement, kind of just to shut you up, right? But that's maybe the best leverage that you have is I'm just going to be really annoying. I'm going to get the community against you. I'm going to show up and keep complaining, and I may take you to an appeal. I may appeal your permit later. And so there's a little bit more leverage at that time. Once a permit's been issued and you're in the appeal process, then the leverage is, well, I'll drop the appeal if you do these things. And it's just a little bit less powerful than if you've been in the process for, years trying to get them to do certain things. So now that we understand why you need to be acting, the next question is when. When is it that you actually have to do something to preserve your rights? And for a lot of the things that we've been discussing, it's now. You need to start paying attention to your local governance now. They are already there. There are elections that are going to be coming up. There's elections that are going to be next year and the year after. And you need to get decision makers in place that are going to vote for your values. And you need to get people that are in positions of power that are going to be making decisions that align with your values. And that's something that can be done now, right? And same with, just voicing your opinion, letting them know what is it that is important to you. Do you want them to be more stringent or more loose in their interpretations? Well, they need to know, right? And again, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The people that are out there calling on a regular basis are the ones that the people in positions of power think are the ones that are voting, right? And so the NRA is just one example. One of the reasons why they have so much power is they have an incredibly powerful phone calling group. And any issue, they have hundreds of people that'll call to their representatives and say, I think this is important. And if there is no counter to that, right? If there's nobody on the other side that's saying, I don't like this, then those representatives and those people in power only think that all of their constituents are the ones that are calling them, right? And so it's really important to just be paying attention and acting now to get those things changed. And you really have to pay attention. And that's more for the background. Excuse me. That's more for the background. Getting those government people in place, getting the statutes and regulations in line. For the more, when an actual thing is coming into your community, you really need to be paying attention. And again, this is sort of a now thing as well, because you never know when that next decision is going to be coming up. And so time is of the essence with all of this. More time you have, the better arguments you're going to be able to make. You're going to be able to spread the load over a longer period of time. You're going to be able to recruit allies to your cause. If you're going to be trying to get experts to comment on it, that takes time for them to do their research and issue reports. Lawyers take time to read through the case law, understand exactly what's happening. You may need to fundraise. So in all the situations, it's really, the quicker you are, the better off you're going to be. And I really don't want this to sound like it's super burdensome, right? I know it can sound a little bit overwhelming when we're talking about, well, we gotta pay attention to this organization and that organization, and my local, my township and my county and my state and the federal, and there's all these different levels. But set up systems, right? There are tools that you can use that will help you track websites. The one that I'm aware of is Machete, like machete with an W. You can set them up to watch a particular township's page, so that when they change it, when they put a public notice up, you'll get an email, right? Easy enough. You can see really quick, is that something that I'm interested in? Do I need to mobilize today? Or is this something that, I'm not worried about, and you let it go? And use your community, right? There are always people in every community that are paying attention, that are trying to do this, but perhaps aren't working together, right? So it can be difficult to build those coalitions at the outset. But there are lots of successful friends groups throughout the state, throughout the country, that are working to protect their little slice of community, whether it's a township, whether it's a particular park, a river. There are different groups that are working to do these, and we are aware of a lot of them. If you're looking to start that kind of group, please reach out to us, and we can put you in contact with some of the groups that we work with that may be able to help you kind of get up and get off the ground. Another way to do it is to go to the actual meetings. right? A lot of times the people that are paying attention to these things are already going to those meetings, but perhaps aren't working together the way that they could be. But by going, making friends, introducing yourself, seeing who's there, what kind of questions are they asking, you might be able to recruit some allies and kind of start your own group and kind of share this load, right? So that you're not feeling like you need to be doing every single part of this all of the time. So community is really important. Building those coalitions, that's the only way that you're going to get really a hand and a stake in a lot of these issues. The next kind of when that comes up is notice and comment. So often when a permit is being applied for, the public will have a right to comment on it. And so you have to get your arguments in that time period. That's the building the record time period that you have to make your arguments so that the decision maker can think of them. Usually the time period is going to be on the notice. If it's not, then look to the relevant agency's regulations, and you should be able to find kind of what the default time period is. Call the agency if you can't find it, but make sure that you know when that deadline is, because it can be, like I said before, you can lose some of your arguments if you're not getting them in that time period. The next big when is appeals, right? So once an actual decision is made, then there's only a certain amount of time that you can appeal it to the next level, right? Whether that's to the circuit court or a zoning hearing board or the environmental hearing board, whatever group it is, there's going to be a certain time limit. And if you don't get your appeal in within that time, then you're going to lose the right to appeal. You can often do sort of a bare bones appeal and then, beef it up a little bit later. So, you don't necessarily have to have every single piece that you're trying to appeal in right off the bat, but you do need to have something in by that time period. On that note, the certified mail is a lifesaver. Certified mail, it's $3.50 or so at the post office. It puts a little barcode on it, you get tracking with it, and then it'll actually lock in the day. And so if it's the day that an appeal is due, if you were to just put it in regular mail, then often it's not deemed filed until it's received by the agency. But if you use something like certified mail, then it's actually the day that you put it in the mail instead. So just keep that in mind if time is of the essence. And really, once those 30 days run, on the appeal, then that's when that permit shield that I mentioned earlier kicks in, and whatever consequences of the permit, they're locked in at that point. So now we know when to act, we know why we need to act. So then how do we actually act? And I'm going to be focusing much more on the how do we act in appeals and comments, as opposed to how do you act to change over your government and changing over board of commissioners and that kind of thing. That's a huge topic for another time, about how you actually kind of mobilize your community to find people and that kind of thing. So in the ideas with notice and comment periods, what is it that you can actually do to give yourself the best chances? And this is another secret that I probably shouldn't tell people, but attorneys aren't magic. We don't know everything. We can't possibly know every single local zoning regulation and zoning code. And we just know how to look and where to look, right? And again, this is something that's really should be empowering, because you can do it too, right? At this point, we probably have the same level of understanding of your community's local zoning code, because I have no idea what your local zoning code says, right? And until we look at it and begin to look through it and see what might apply, I don't know it, right? And so, what you're going to want to do when you're starting out and looking at a permit is you're going to do what we learn in law school is called issue spotting. So issue spotting is 90% of law school education. And it's what all of the law school exams are based on. Half the bar exam is based on issue spotting. And essentially what that means is being able to look at a problem and say, look at a scenario and say, maybe there's a problem there. I think there's a problem there. And then over here, there might be a problem. And you don't actually necessarily have to know the answer. It's really, at this point, is just a matter of spotting it and being able to put a highlighter on it and say, that might be an issue. You should look into that. So what you're going to do when you're looking through a permit application is constantly just asking yourself, could there be a problem there? Are they maybe dumping too much? Are they, is that erosion sedimentation plan suitable for what they're trying to do? Is the river downstream downslope going to be affected by this? Is there going to be too much siltation? Are there animals and plants that might be affected by this? Write everything down. You want to be comprehensive at this point, because just bringing it up may actually save that issue for the future. This is drafting your comment. And as you're putting those comments together, just mentioning that, hey, this might be an issue, this might be an issue, can be enough to preserve that issue for the future. And it may be enough to alert the decision makers to something that they weren't paying attention to, that they may not have actually thought about being a problem, right? And that's part of the reason that public participation is so important, and why it is so just necessary to have that time period, and for you as a community advocate to utilize it, right? Use it to your advantage, because there really is a lot of things when you are having a person that wants to move in somewhere, applying for a permit. Well, they might just leave out the fact that it's next door to a wetland, right? If they don't have to, right? They may leave off the worst consequences of what they're applying to do. And if there is nobody to call them out, right? And nobody that's on the ground that says, no, how do you not recognize that it's going to have this effect downstream? Well, DEP is going to be looking at it often just on paper, or these agencies are going to be looking at it on paper, and they're not going to necessarily have the more holistic understanding of the community, of the other things that are nearby that are going to, cumulatively affect the way that this moves forward. And so that's really where these community advocates come in, is making the decision makers aware that those exist, that those negative consequences might be there. And it honestly can be something where they say, oh my goodness, we didn't even think of that, right? We didn't even recognize that that could be an issue. But yeah, now that we see it, we obviously have to act on it, right? So it's really important that you do mention these different arguments. And remember, you're building the record that's going to carry through the decision. So if these arguments aren't brought up, if you're not complaining and recognizing and spotting these issues, it can actually hinder the ability to bring those arguments later down the line. From a scientific standpoint, I'm not going to talk too much about that because I'm not a scientist. If you have the resources, hire a scientific expert. But on another side of that, it can actually be enough and be upheld for a decision maker to make a decision if you are aware of different things, right? If you think there might be an endangered species in the area, to bring that up, or if you have experience of something very similar happening nearby and you have firsthand experience of that, that can actually be enough for the decision maker to deny a permit, request permit modifications, based on your firsthand experience that you put in your comment. The other part of it, so I may have missed saying that the best arguments and the best comments are going to have a scientific or a legal basis, right? It's often not enough to just say, I really love this park, right? And having 10,000 people all write in to say, I really love this park, it can have some weight on the decision maker. but it may not be enough to sway them. And depending on kind of the burden of persuasion here, it may not be enough to override what is being allowed or being requested. So hire an expert if you have the ability to do that for a science background. From a legal perspective, you can hire an attorney, and we will gladly find some great arguments for you and help you make them. If you're going to go it on your own, which is completely understandable given the cost and whatnot, and the purpose of this is to teach you how to give good comments without necessarily getting an attorney involved. You're going to need to show that the permit doesn't comply with the law in some way. So there's generally 3 levels of sources. You're going to have the federal, the state, and the local level. And then you have statutes and regulations. Statutes are generally more broad and overarching. Clean Water Act has a lot of specific pieces to it, but generally the water has to be clean. And then the EPA has promulgated, and the DEP from the state level has promulgated these regulations that say this is what clean means. This is what we are going to say is actually clean. And so that's actually that's what a lot of the application material is going to have to be compared against, is what exactly is being allowed on a regulation level. And does that is the permit in violation of those regulations? So you're going to want to look through those kinds of things. The other one, again, is the local zoning code and comprehensive plans. Some really good arguments can be made based on those. The comprehensive plan and zoning code, Ryan's going to get into this more tomorrow, but generally here's the plan. This is what we think is good for our community. This is the way that we want to grow. And if something is in violation of that, or they're asking for the comprehensive plan to be changed in order to make their use allowed where it wants to be allowed, there's some really good arguments that you can make and say, this is, you're thinking of it now in this short term, you want this particular business to be in this particular location, but we thought about this 5 years ago, and we had comments and all of this time, at that time, to come up with this comprehensive plan, and now we're just going to throw that away because this guy wants to move in. And so there's some really good arguments that can be made for, let's pause, let's relax, let's not just throw away the comprehensive plan and throw away zoning for this short-term person who wants to use this. The process to go about when you are actually looking into these regulations, looking into these statutes, you're going to want to think about what parts of the environment are affected and looking for appropriate laws that affect that, right? Is there a dumping issue that RCRA might apply, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act might apply? Or are they asking to put things into the river where the Clean Water Act might apply? Is it a factory where air particulates are going to come in and Clean Air Act is going to apply? So kind of thinking about all of those generally. Then you're going to find these, right? And you can find almost all of these online. They generally, the Code of Federal Regulations, the United States Code, they're all online. You can look through them, you can find it. I suggest that you start by looking through the table of contents, because it can really give you a sense of the structure of the statute, the structure of the regulations, and it can also really key you in. And you may see something particular, a particular section that really seems to particularly apply to your situation that you may miss if statutes and regulations, they're tough to read through. They're dense, they're boring. And so if you kind of start from the beginning and try and go through, you may not make it to the particular thing that's actually going to be effective in your situation. So I really suggest taking the 5 minutes to read through the table of contents is very, very important. The other really important piece is to take notes. It's so easy to lose information. It's easy to see something that seems really important, and then you go down a rabbit hole trying to find more support for that, or reading further into the statute, and then it's hard to find that statute or that regulation that seemed so on point, and it can be incredibly frustrating and waste a lot of time, right? And when we're talking about how we want to be using our energy efficiently, right? And you may be working with other people that are also helping you research. So you really want to just make sure that you're taking notes, being meticulous so that you're not missing things, and able to give the best comment that you possibly can. And be comprehensive, especially in the notes, the comment period. Anything that looks applicable, just put it in your comment. It's better to mention it and preserve the argument than to second guess and leave it out. There's essentially no harm, without getting too nitpicky and just saying every single one of these applies, right? You don't want to dilute your argument by putting a bunch of very bad arguments. But if it's a decent argument, put it in there, right? It's not nitpicky at that point. But yeah, it's a bit of a balance between trying to be comprehensive without diluting the really big pieces. But regardless, you will still preserve those issues. Even if they're diluted enough that the decision maker doesn't recognize them, you would still preserve them for appeal as long as they're in there. And if a lawyer gets involved later, they're going to be limited again to that record. And what may not seem like the best argument may be what the lawyer is looking for. So really important to just be comprehensive. Again, comments are something that everybody can do. Everybody can put them together. And we're just trying to give some of those skills about how to do that effectively to preserve arguments and get the decision maker to find in your favor so that you don't have to appeal it later. So that is the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer those now. And thanks for taking the time to listen.
Again, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, or you could just unmute yourself and talk. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming out, and Tim, thank you for the presentation. If anyone has any questions they think of later, you can always reach out to us at info@fairshake-els.org, and I'm gonna put that in the chat right now. And yeah, and feel free to check us out on our website as well, or on Facebook. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with us. So whatever one is most convenient for you, we'll get back to you. And thanks again for everyone for showing up, and we'll see you all tomorrow, hopefully too.
Thanks, everybody.